Hello. In this video, I want to talk about local and session storage in the browser. So the storage APIs are pretty standard in JavaScript, and you can read about them if you search just MDN storage API. You'll find the web storage API documentation and the different aspects of that. So rather than using cookies, you can use storage that goes into the browser, and you have the options of session storage and local storage. So these share a similar interface where you can check the length, you can check the key, you can get items from the local storage or the session storage, set items, you can remove items, and you can clear the entire thing. So essentially the way that this works, if you can't tell by the API, is it's just a key value store. So I have a simple app I created with Vite in vanilla JavaScript, and so it has this HTML page and some CSS to style it, and it's essentially just a form that fills in a little random key and value, and so I can click add to add storage items to local storage or session storage, and I can clear the storage, and I show a demo where I can add a new number to a numbers key, which it has a stringified JSON array of numbers as its value. And so I can also use a demo to set an object to a random user pulled from a fake data API. So the user key becomes the different JSON object. So you could have a JSON object, those could have keys, which are more objects or more nested arrays, and you could store basically any type of data that you want in a key value store. So you have disadvantages over a traditional database management system like SQLite or Postgres, but you have the convenience that it's really quick and easy to get started with, and it's built right into the browser. So essentially, the way that I've created this in the HTML is quite simple. Just have a heading, we have a main content with the form for adding the storage, we have the buttons, and then we have an empty table with the key and value column. And then in the JavaScript, we essentially select all of these items, and then we have a bunch of functions, and we add event listeners to do different things. So when you click the clear storage button, it's going to run the clear storage function. When you click this one, it's going to run the corresponding function in this one, and you're going to have a form submitter on the form up here for adding to the key value store. And one little thing I've added here is a window event listener for local storage. So how this works is essentially by default, local storage, because it can be shared between multiple tabs, you won't know when local storage has changed in another tab, but this event listener will allow you to listen to that change. And that doesn't apply to session storage, and you'll see why in a minute. But essentially, I also update the storage table to reflect local storage, if it's coming from local storage, on the initial load, and I fill the form with this random data just so that I don't have to type anything here for the demo. Now, the updater is simple. It's just adding this content to the DOM, and the form filler is just creating some random data here. The clear storage is showing you the API for either local or session storage. So I've done this since the API is the same. I have these two lines: storage driver equals local storage, or storage driver equals session storage. And so I use global this to point out that these are coming from the global scope. So you can literally just type session storage to access this, but I like to explicitly point out that it's coming from global this. And so if we set the storage driver to session storage, it's going to use session storage, and local storage, local storage. So now wherever I use storage driver, it's the appropriate storage driver. So if I clear storage, that's going to clear out all the keys and values. If I, in my set object, I'm just simply creating some data, and the key is going to be user, and the data is going to be whatever that user is. So that's where I do this. I'm just setting that JSON. And the way that I have to do that, you'll notice, is using the built-in JSON.stringify and the JSON.parse as well, for the numbers one at least. the JSON.parse to essentially see what's in the key value store right now, turn it into JSON, then we can edit it and then push it back by stringifying it. So that's the next example, is essentially when there's nothing in the key value store, there's no numbers key. So I have to check if there is a numbers key, if storage driver.numbers exists, then if it doesn't exist, I need to create it. And so then it definitely exists by line 54, and I can fetch it out. Now it may be empty or it may have something in it. I can push something to it, I can restringify it, and I can update the view. So click add, and every time I add, it puts a new random number on that same numbers by fetching it, adding it, and putting it back. The form submission for this is just a standard form submitter that gets the key and value and puts them in as key and value into the storage driver. So it's pretty simple. So let's see what's the difference between local storage and session storage. Right now I'm using the session storage, and so you'll see when I reload the page, everything is persisting just fine. All of these things come back. So it appears as if this data is saved to the browser. Now what you'll notice if I go into another tab, so this is another window with another tab of the same site, you'll see I don't have that data here. And if I add data here, I can reload this and reload this. They're having their own data. So each tab is its own session, and the data gets to be separate there. So what would be an application for this? Well, let's say you just want to do a simple, maybe like a tax calculator that's in the browser. And maybe the user wants to have two different tax scenarios. Like, what if I live in West Virginia versus I live in Virginia? So they have one tab for each thing. You wouldn't want, when you load the page or you change something over here for the Virginia page, you wouldn't want it to change all the West Virginia data. You might want to look at those things side by side. So that would be an example. Or if you wanted to have, say, Google Gmail logged into one email in one tab and a different email in a different tab. If you use something that is consistent across tabs, then that login information is going to be synced, where you may want it not to be synced depending on your use case. The other advantage here is that it'll persist on reload, but when you actually close the tab and then reopen it, so like this is considered a new session, and so all that data has been cleared out. So this would be really good for a super sensitive credential that you're saving to the browser. Like, for example, when you log into your bank account, they might give you a token that isn't your username and password, but it's a way of authenticating you after you've entered your username and password. It identifies this session that, say, for the next 10 or 20 minutes, they're going to let me use this token to authenticate my API requests so that I can access my bank information. So you might not want this to get saved to local storage or to cookies, because when you close the browser and reopen it, it's possible that those things are still there, and so your login state might continue. That might be okay for something like your email, but if it's your bank account, you may not want, the next time you open the browser, you may not want that to still be logged into your bank. You may want, as soon as you close the tab, you want that session to end, and so you would have to re-log in if you wanted to reset that authentication state. Now, for local storage, you're not going to have this situation. And so just quickly before we move on to local storage, I'll show you in the application tab, just like if you've looked at cookies before in the application tab, all your browser storage you can view here. And so session storage and local storage are separate storage APIs, or API locations that are referred to by the API. So you have one of them being local storage here, and you have one of them being session storage here. So it's the same key value concept, but depending on which one you're using, you're going to be editing a different one. So local storage doesn't change when I add new session storage keys and values. And you can also clear that manually in the application tab, and you see that's reflected here as well. Now, finally, you'll also notice that the storage event handler here, when storage is changing, it's updating the storage table. So probably the reason that even though we're using session storage right now, when we added new keys and values like this, and then we clicked clear right here, our table updated, and that's because we have an event listener on the storage event, so that probably triggered our table to be updated because it wasn't our own tab. When our own tab edits things, we have to manually call update storage table. But when an external place, like another entity, in this case the browser control panel, because another tab would not apply for session storage, when another entity is editing the local storage, it fires that storage event so that we can know that something changed that is beyond our own control and update our view accordingly. Now for local storage, again, it's going to be the same basic API. I'm just going to switch out the driver that I'm using here, and you'll see that when we now add different keys and values, it's not changing the session storage, but it is changing the local storage. And what you'll also notice is that I have these two different tabs open, and as I change things in one tab, because I have this event listener for storage events, now this comes into play for syncing multiple tabs. So when I change local storage here, by default my view would not update, but I have this storage listener that updates the storage table on a storage event. So this tab, say, adds this key value. Now this tab gets a storage event that says something happened to local storage, and then it calls its updater to update the view accordingly. And so that's a really nice way if you do have things you want synced between tabs, like go back to that example of a tax calculator. You want to have a tax calculator, and maybe you have multiple portions of the tax form scrolled to in different tabs. One tab you're in one section, one tab you're in a different section. You might want to add a key and value using a form at one part, and then in a different part in a different tab, and have it be working on the same, let's say Virginia tax form. And that would be really convenient. I've used this where you want to make a change in one part of your app that affects the view in another part of an app, and you want that to update in real time. You don't want to have to reload the page, because you have no way of knowing, the one page has no way of knowing when another tab has made an edit, unless you have an event listener set up for that. So that's the really useful part of local storage. And the other useful part is that obviously no matter what tab you are in, that is going to be synced to the same data. And furthermore, when you close the browser and you reopen it, that data is going to be there as well. Now, obviously, like any browser storage, it's possible for the users to clear out that data themselves. Obviously, like I did it in the developer tools, you can do it in your browser settings, and there are different things that could cause, the local storage to get cleared out for a particular site. So you wouldn't want to store like the most important data ever in local storage and not have it backed up. But it's really great if you just want to have persistent storage, low stakes data that you just you want to have persisted for the next time the user comes to the site, because they may not want to log in to your stupid tax calculator just to do a little calculation and have those same pieces of data saved for the next time they come. They might not want to log in and connect to some server and have you sell all their data. They might just want to save that in their own browser and just keep that private to themselves. So this key value store of local storage is really powerful for that purpose. And just like session storage, where I mentioned a bank could store, say the key is the auth token, and then the value is some long auth token created by an authentication server. Now you can use this in your API calls, just like with a cookie. You could use this in your API calls instead to authenticate yourself to the server and get certain data. So you can do that with local storage as well. You could say log in a user and then store the auth token to local storage for something less sensitive than a bank account, where maybe next time the user opens the browser, maybe you do want them to stay logged in. Just like when you come into Gmail, every time you close and reopen your browser, you might still be signed in from the last time you used your browser, and that may be the experience that you prefer. So the last thing I'm going to mention is just a quick note on the security of this. So a common misconception is that local storage is insecure and other forms of browser storage, which we haven't covered yet, are secure. And so this is actually not true. So this is a trick, because essentially anything that you can access with JavaScript, be that a regular document.cookie, whether that be local storage or session storage, whether that be the origin private file system or the file system access API, or any other essentially JavaScript API. If you can access it from JavaScript, it is vulnerable to the same types of attacks. So I'm going to say that again. If it's accessible from JavaScript, it's vulnerable to the same types of attacks. So just because you put something in the origin private file system inside of a SQLite database, and it sounds really cool, or you put something inside of IndexedDB, which is a database provided by the browser, just because you put that in some sort of fancier storage solution doesn't necessarily make it any more secure than just basic local storage and session storage. So I'm not going to get into the vulnerability itself, but I'll point out that if you had a misconception that okay, local storage is insecure but other storage mechanisms are more secure, that is generally not true. The only exception to that is an HTTP only cookie. So this has a storage advantage that it can't be accessed from JavaScript, but there are security issues with cookies in themselves. So just to show you that quickly, if you have cookies in here, you'll see that this HTTP only column of the cookies lister would be checked if a cookie was HTTP only. And what that means is essentially the cookie can be set by the server that serves your website, and then it can be sent back in subsequent requests by your browser, but you can't actually access that in JavaScript. And that's a security feature so that cross-site scripting attacks essentially can't access your cookies using document.cookie, and then they can't forge requests on your behalf using that particular method. They could use other methods, but not that one. And so yeah, to recap, if you can access it from JavaScript, it's vulnerable to the same types of attacks because it's very possible for scripts that you bring in from outside sources to basically trick you using social engineering or different techniques to get you to insert some sort of malicious script code into your DOM. And if they can get malicious script code into your DOM, they have access to all the same global this dot whatever, the same document.cookie, the same everything as you do, and so they can access all of that data. So just keep that in mind that it's not a huge security concern unless you're storing like really sensitive data, and there are also mitigation techniques that you can use to put sensitive data into local storage and cookies and session storage, etc. I mean, there are huge companies and major banks that are going to put a sensitive auth token in local storage, and that's not necessarily insecure on its own. It's only insecure in the context of what other protections they have in place to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. So in conclusion, local and session storage use the same type of API, and so you can easily switch out the adapter, the driver that you want to use, and use the same API, and it's essentially just a key value store. And key value stores are super powerful because you can treat them like databases stored in text. So if you have text, you can have JSON. If you have JSON, you can represent a whole lot of different types of data. So the advantage over this over cookies is you can store larger amounts of data, and you don't have the challenge that cookies are automatically sent to the server where you fetched your code from. So in the case of cookies, you set a cookie, and then every subsequent request to the server where your code is hosted, your website is hosted, will contain those cookies, whereas local storage, you get to kind of opt in which data you want to send to a server or not. And there are also more advanced storage mechanisms, including Origin Private File System Access API, and IndexedDB, that go beyond the capabilities of this, but local and session storage are a good middle point to just have a simple key value store that can either persist just for the session or the tab, or also for all tabs and be persistent on browser close and reopen. So thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.